Welcome to the Woody Hayes Athletic Center on a Wednesday. That is Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. It is a Woody Wednesday, and it is a Will Wednesday. There's 2 games in the bank now.
It's a great name.
It is. It's a strong name.
Mm-hmm.
Strapping lad.
That's right.
William Landis, William Howard, cut from the same cloth.
That's right.
Philly's finest. We have 2 games to evaluate at Ohio State. Mm-hmm. Certainly his resume longer than that at Kansas State. But what do you think is the first thing that comes to mind watching him take control of this Ohio State offense through the first 2 games of his career here?
I think it's that word you just used, control. And I know he's still kind of learning on the fly, and Ryan Day said that on Tuesday, and he will continue to get more comfortable. But I think he's looked pretty comfortable in the first 2 games in an offense that is like not – I don't know that it's overly complicated, but as we've talked about before, it does put a lot on his plate in terms of decision-making pre- and post-snap and getting in and out of plays determining or depending on what the look of the defense is. And even for a guy who has as experience as Will is, I could see that being a little overwhelming or being a little clunky at the start, and it really hasn't been. There are maybe a couple of things to nitpick in terms of like passing mechanics and some of the throws that he's made, but I think most of his decisions have been very good, and he seems to have a pretty firm grasp on what this offense is now, and I think ultimately what they want to continue to evolve into as they get further into the season. And I've been pretty impressed with that because I didn't view that as a given, even though he is a guy who's played a lot of football.
I wondered if, again, it's an insult to call it this and use this cliche, but I thought that Ohio State was pretty vanilla and straightforward, buttoned up in week 1 against Akron, and I thought that was probably by design. Chip Kelly is learning the personnel. Will Howard is operating for the first time in the horseshoe with a bunch of new teammates around. First time for Ryan Day to not be calling the plays. Like I thought that was also like a reasonable approach to expect in week 1. But what I was most curious about was like what they found out about Will Howard and then how much more they were comfortable putting on his plate. And I asked Will about that on Saturday, and he was like, well, the game plan was different than week 1 to week 2, but he kind of pushed back a little bit on the idea of like, well, they figured out that he could process 50 more things and put it all into the playbook. It's not just solely a conversation about Will Howard. The other 10 guys have to be able to execute that too. But I thought, to me, from the outside, it felt notable how many more things they were asking the quarterback to do compared to the Akron game. And like maybe they figured it out. Like, not that they didn't have any idea. They'd been around this guy since spring. He learned that offense in a pretty rapid fashion. Still had all of training camp. It's not like they were just like, oh gosh, somehow we wound up with a good quarterback and a veteran who can process information. But you still, Ryan Day calls those assumptions that you make, and then you find out in the game what you can or can't handle, or if you were right or wrong about an idea. And I feel like Chip Kelly and Ryan Day got confirmation against Akron that, like, outside of one notable exception, the decisions that he's making, and that wasn't even like not understanding. He tried to do too much on the fumble against Akron, but like all the other in-game decisions, he can do the RPO things. He can read defenses and process information, and that you can go more up tempo. Like even as something as simple as the amount of times they were huddling or not huddling compared from week 1 to week 2 felt significant to me, and I think that felt like a significant thing. It's like, this guy can handle everything that Chip Kelly and Ryan Day can come up with. Yeah,
he definitely can. And I do. Chip said something 2 weeks ago, or I guess a week ago, about how the offense is very much game plan opponent specific, which means it can look fairly different week to week. Like I thought it almost looked like a totally different offense against Western Michigan than it did against Akron. They ran more RPOs against Western Michigan than I think Ryan Day has run in the previous 5 years. And I'm not saying that as a criticism. I'm just pointing it out because it felt very different. And that wasn't the same thing they did the week against Akron, and maybe it won't be the same thing they do against Marshall. But when you are, it's not stuff that they just magically throw into the playbook that Will Howard's never seen before. But when you are changing sort of that drastically week to week and really emphasizing different things week to week, you have to be a pretty smart guy, a quarterback, to handle that. If I don't know that they'd do the same thing if they had a freshman playing quarterback or a guy who hadn't made 25 starts or whatever it was at Kansas State playing quarterback. So when they got Will Howard, the things we talked about were like his size, which is obviously apparent. He can use his legs. I think with some fine tuning, there are some things to really like as a passer too, but we didn't talk much about his mind and how he thinks about things. And I suppose, at least for us anyway, that's not something you can really pick up on until you see him operate within Ohio State's offense. Maybe they saw it on film too, but I do think it's been apparent and a bit of a revelation, I think, just like kind of how smart Will is about football.
To me, that feels like the differentiator, the extraordinary trait, because if it allows Ohio State to run these RPO concepts, which are, because of his rushing ability, effectively triple option plays, I don't understand how you can possibly defend Ohio State.
Yeah, it'll put defenses in a bind, I think, which is the design, right? Like Ohio State just hasn't had that element, because even when Ohio State had Justin Fields, they weren't doing this stuff. They would let Justin run sometimes, and Justin was always a threat to scramble, which I think afforded you some space, but they weren't by design, I think, putting defenses in a bind the way that they are seemingly going to do with Will Howard, with some of these, where they're run pass options or run pass options, which seems like maybe the touchdown that Jeremiah Smith was, when he could have handed it off or thrown the ball to Carnell Tate or thrown the ball to Jeremiah, depending on how the defense reacted to it. A lot of teams do it, and Ohio State has found a way to be incredibly successful, just kind of going about its business another way. But when you involve Will with his ability to run the ball the way that he can, and I'm glad we got a little taste of that against Western Michigan with the ball that he pulled and ran in for a touchdown. I don't really know how you slow it down either.
Because that's another, we assumed like that was a given. Will Howard is going to be able to use his legs, and he only ran the one time for the 6-yard touchdown on Saturday against Western Michigan. Like, it doesn't even have to be 10 times a game for it to be effective. I think that's, like, he can do it more if the situation demands it. Western Michigan or Akron really didn't, but we've seen it in both games where there have been designed opportunities. That I think there's going to be more. I don't know what the number is for what it winds up being, but when I asked Ryan Day on Tuesday, like his thoughts and what they thought from the first 2 weeks, he was referencing the poise and like the way that you feel him on the field. And he's like, I don't know if you guys can feel it. And it's like, I'm in the press box, so I'm a long way away. I really don't, and it doesn't matter. But like, if the head coach is saying that, that's not something we've heard from him in a while. And I even as great, and everyone who watches the podcast daily knows how highly I think of CJ Stroud. When you compare, and this is a stupid thing for me to do, but it's like, it's 2 games, but the way that Ohio State is talking about Will Howard and the dynamic skills that he brings and the way that they expand the arsenal. Like, CJ was a BPS, a great processor. You could talk about what he sees from defenses for 3 hours and you learn something every single time. It wasn't going to get to the, other than against Georgia, they weren't in a position where like, let's use CJ to expand the rushing attack. Like, he had to make some plays to expand the passing game, and he did. And he ran to extend some drives against Georgia. He probably could have done that more throughout his career. But like, when you look at the package, the way Ohio State is talking about it, it hasn't been, I think, since Justin Fields that, and even to some extent, they didn't view him in this way with run pass option and all these other avenues that it opens up for the offense. I find it interesting. There's only 2 games, so like, I'm not suggesting that the work is done by any stretch of the imagination, but so far the conversation has been very different than what I can recall.
I think I just, maybe that's because they feel like it'll be a little easier to problem solve when you lean on that stuff. Like, every offense encounters difficulties, like they're going to go through ruts. This offense is going to get into a game where things just aren't looking great and they're going to have to like try to grind something out. I assume that will happen at some point this year. When the ability to use a quarterback's legs is an answer that is available to you when you encounter those situations, I just think it makes solving the problems much easier. And I get the sense from Ryan Day especially that, one, he is leaning into that idea more, because that could have been true certainly with Justin Fields, and I think it could have been true with CJ if you wanted to. We saw like the Northwestern game when they literally couldn't throw the ball. Guess what opened things up? They ran CJ a little bit.
Yeah.
But now I think Ryan Day just has a different mindset on it, and a quarterback too who I think embraces that part of the position. Not every quarterback does necessarily, because it's not fun to get hit. So like, I understand that, but Will, I just think, is the kind of guy who is, you say him, we think we need to do this, and this to win today, and he says okay, no questions asked.
I'll go ahead and I'll just double down on this stupidity. Like, I knew for all along, like I thought CJ would be more successful in some ways, depending on whatever standard of success you want to use. Like this guy was made to play in the NFL.
Yep. 100%.
And like when I'm giving all these flowers to Howard, like I don't know what his NFL career is going to look like. Certainly that's down the road. I think he's designed to play at the collegiate level at a very successful, at a very high level. So that's the give and take of trying to figure out what you need and why. I think even Will Howard himself was saying in August, I don't have to be a superhero for this team. If he comes close to that, great. Like that's how Ohio State will win a national championship. But it's like a JT Barrett conversation. It is like a Tim Tebow conversation. Like what Ohio State is trying to accomplish, probably you have to have, I think in my take is that even when Trevor Lawrence won a national championship, he did that at times by using his legs. So I'm not maybe breaking any news here that Ohio State wanted that, especially after what, limitations it found itself dealing with a year ago. But that was true even when C.J. Stroud was the quarterback. And I think that is, Ryan Day has always prided himself on the passing attack and the ability to get somebody unleashed through the air and the arm strength and arm talent. But it almost seems like you're preparing and playing with an arm tied behind your back if you don't lean on that rushing attack. And the fact that Will Howard can do that, I think, is really significant for what this team can become.
Yeah, I don't know that anyone, I won't say it that definitively, I guess, but I think it is difficult to try to win a national championship in college football by just being like a drop back pass team and that's all you kind of do, right? Even if you have one of the best we've ever seen from a pure throwing standpoint, like C.J. Stroud and the receivers that Ohio State has, it's just a tough way to live. You got to be able to run the ball, and you have to have a quarterback who can be involved in that too, I think. Trevor Lawrence is a great point. Even like Stetson Bennett at Georgia, who I don't think anyone thinks is the greatest athlete in the world, but like he got involved with his legs during Georgia's championship runs. We saw CJ do it against Georgia in 2022 because like he kind of had to. It's what the game calls for. And I think I'm doing the same thing you're trying to do, is like toe the line. I'm not even trying to compare like Will to CJ, because guess what? I'll take CJ. CJ's very good.
For sure.
He's
if I'm building it, but I think that's the point.
But I think there is something to the idea of like, guys that are built for the NFL, guys that are built for college. Usually the guys that are built for the NFL still do pretty well in college, but there's something about the dual threat nature of a guy like Will Howard and the rugged style of play, I think, from lack of a better term, that I think will serve Ohio State pretty well this year. Yeah.
I don't know. That really wasn't what I thought we were going to talk about today, but my mind is working in strange ways.
Yeah, well, I think I don't know. I'm anticipating the time is going to come when Will Howard is probably going to have to maybe not win a game with his legs, because if they get into a game like that, the defense could win it for them, I suppose. But the complement to the defense, I think, might have to be Will Howard using his legs. So, like, I'm anticipating that. So I get why your mind's kind of there, too.
I think even Ohio State's success on defense plays into that, because it's so hard to balance. A high-level passing attack, even at some point in the game, is going to have a couple incompletions. And if you have a fast 3 and out and you leave too much time on the clock, then you're putting extra strain on your defense. Like, it's just such a release valve, both to keep the clock rolling and to protect your defense if you can run the football that way. And this is probably the very definition of reading too much into the first 2 weeks. And really, even Will Howard didn't do that much of it, but the scrambling and design run part, and I think the ability to understand when to do both is like the most interesting thing that I've seen from him through the first 2 games. Like again, if we're going to talk about where he can still improve, and Ryan Day did not specify when I asked what's the improvement week checklist. Like, he had the bad decision in week 1 against Akron, and then he underthrew a deep ball to Jeremiah Smith in week 2. And outside of that, I don't really know what else there could be to point to. I'm not a college football coach, so I'm sure that actual evaluation is more in depth from Chip Kelly and Ryan Day, but like, I feel like they have to be pretty satisfied with the choice they made and what they've seen through these two games at this point.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I think maybe just a little quicker on stuff, like the ball to Jelani in the end zone. Maybe throw a slightly different ball, but I think throw that earlier. Maybe throw the ball to Jeremiah earlier, kind of thing. And I think that goes back to for all the nice things we said about him and how he's in command of the offense, he is still learning the offense and learning the guys he's playing with at game speed. So I think those will come, but that's I think fairly nitpicky too. He's been largely very good. If you look at stuff like turnover-worthy plays and like PFF, I don't believe he has any. He's been pretty sharp.
He's got one. We know.
But I actually don't know that they called that one. Believe it or not. And maybe it should have been clearly.
Can we send that in?
Yeah, we can correct the record on that one. That play against Akron should have been. I think he's got some stuff mechanically with the way that he throws the ball that I think once or twice a game you're going to see a thrown ball that kind of like makes you cringe a little bit. But when it's all synced up, he's clearly got good touch and good accuracy. That throw to Emeka on the little over off a play action was like, I don't know how you got the ball there.
It was right after the throw to Jeremiah too.
So there's going to be a little bit of volatility, I think, but I think you live with it because the good is really good, and he's just such an X factor with his legs too. That's like it's okay if you're not CJ Stroud and every single ball you throw is perfect.
Maybe this conversation would be very different if CJ had been allowed to run in games other than the Georgia game.
Yeah, maybe. But I think even CJ's like a big burly dude. I think CJ running is a little, let me get out and get out of balance kind of thing. And Will's like, let me get out and I'm going to throw my shoulder into you kind of thing, which you got to be careful about because you don't want your quarterback getting hurt in that way. But I also I think that really ignites an offense. Like even against Akron, I thought the one design lead run they had for Will felt like to me it came at a time when the offense was still trying to get out of the blocks, and then once they got that conversion, not that it was perfect from that point on, but the offense seemed to have a little more juice, a little more crispness to it. So I think running the quarterback helps you that way too.
Well, I mean, if you want to be like Josh Allen, you got to be like Josh Allen.
It's not a bad guy to emulate. Yeah,
one of the all-time greats.
Well,
everybody says
that.
So.
Yeah.
So Will Howard also appeared, or is going to appear, on Kings of the North.
He was on Tuesday with okay. Doug.
I knew it was I didn't know if it was live or not. So
it was a pre-recorded interview that was on the Tuesday show. I don't know what they talked about.
Okay. So the point is, you can also hear it from Will Howard directly again. He was on The Notebook on Saturday night as well.
He was. I saw that.
The guy loves.
I was watching. I was like, is he going to go in the locker room?
Yeah. No, I thought about it, but CJ Barnett and we've got a rivalry going.
Yeah.
So I know when I can push the boundaries, and I saw him afterwards, and he was like, "You got me this week." So on we go. I'm going to go in the locker room at some point this year.
Yeah.
That's now our secret, America. Don't tell CJ. We're going to get to that. But anyway, it's been fun to have a little something to talk about with these quarterbacks and thinking about it a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes for a great Woody Wednesday, and the podcast daily. Hopefully you learned something, and if not, I'm sorry. I'll try again better the next time. That's Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. So long.